My mum didn't turn up, so it's probably a good time to do it. So this is called The Urge. When you grow up, said my headmaster, all this will become clear. And with that, we all stood up and walked back to our classroom in single file. Our 10-year-old lives utterly and irretrievably corrupted by what we'd just witnessed. It was 1977. I'd been perfectly content doodling a dogfight between a TIE fighter and an X-Wing when he had slipped solemnly into the room and whispered something dark and mysterious into our teacher's ear. I fancy she shivered before slowly putting down her board brush and tapping her desk with her ruler to pull me back from outer space. We were marched along the corridor in a reverent silence like a troop of death row convicts on our way to the sparkly chair, and led to the place that had always been punishably out of bounds, behind the ragged velvet curtains at the back of the stage. We sat in cross-legged rows, the smallest at the front, and waited in the half-light afforded by an overheating projector for our head teacher to muster himself for the execution. He coughed and mumbled something that I expect we all missed because it coincided with the first of a series of badly drawn slides depicting the adventures of a very hairy man with his dangly willy on display and a lady with her cartoon tits out, wearing large brown strapless pants. When a man loves a lady very much, he began to explain to an audience of gigglers and nervous twitchers, while I idly considered whether Princess Leia wore brown curly pants like that as well. Now, you see, I'd always thought that girls wore green pants to match their skirts. I'd just started to wonder how on earth the lady in the picture managed to stop them falling down if they didn't have sides when the picture changed to one of the beardy man laying on top of the topless lady. For a moment I thought my teacher had put the slide in the machine sideways, but then it changed again to a cross-section of what it might look like if the beardy man slipped his willy inside the lady's brown pants. Now why would he want to do that? I was debating this as more blurry pictures clicked by, all too quickly for me to take in, until finally we were presented with a painting of the finished article. A smiley, lone-toothed baby wearing a big pink ribbon. And quite what the fusty old goat had been talking about as he had mumbled his way through his annual spiel, I really had no idea. It all seemed a little scary and quite unlikely to me. The only bit that I did catch before we were led back to class by two much relieved junior school teachers was his final warning shot that when we were older, the boys would start to feel certain urges towards the girls. Well, glad we got that cleared up. My sexual awakening, the first time I noticed an urge, was during an episode of Doctor Who in 1978. It's true. It was called The Face of Evil, and it's so firmly burned on my memory because it featured the debut of leather-clad savage Leela, played by sex siren Louise Jameson. Now, I know I wasn't the only 11-year-old boy to have been affected by the Doctor's latest companion, because I've since met a girl whose father named her after the character, and a bloke who keeps the actress's original costume in a glass cabinet opposite his bed. He lives in Slough. Leela was my first crush. Up until that point in my life, it had always been about the stories, but once Leela arrived, I could no longer give a toss about the story. What I could give a toss about, however, sorry, I'm reading ahead, was the vain but determined hope that at least some of the naked lady bits I'd seen in that backstage peep show the year before might slip out of that all too brief Tarzan kit that she always wore for me so that I could, well, I didn't really know what. Yeah, I had that urge all right, but I had no idea what I was expected to do with it. Anyway, out the blue, at the end of the invasion of time, Leela suddenly decided to marry Andrin, a Time Lord that she'd known for, 5 minutes, and as far as I could tell, had no urgy interest in her whatsoever. He hadn't even tried to look down her top when she bent over. At Sunday school, I'd learned that if you wanted to make babies, then you had to get married first. I must have missed that bit in the slideshow. Perhaps the headmaster forgot to mention it in his rush to give us the basic mechanics of the plot before turning so red that he exploded. I decided that Leela must have wanted to make a baby. Quite why she decided to make a baby with Andrew and not the doctor, I have never managed to work out. So to recap, if you want to make a baby, first you get married, then you stick your willy in a lady's pants. Not quite sure what the urge bit has to do with it all though, but it didn't leave me when Leela did. I carried on urging over Doctor Who companions right through the 80s, well except for Bonnie Langford, obviously. And there were others. I urged all over Sally James on Tis Was every Saturday morning, and Joanna Lumley as Purdy in The New Adventures with her RP accent and her white TR7. That urged me right off the scale, that did. The first time I saw a lady naked was in The Sweeney. It was Linda Bellingham before she became the Oxo Mum. She was laying dead on a bed whilst Dennis Waterman and John Thor made misogynistic wisecracks around her by way of a murder investigation. The channel was hastily changed to avoid the embarrassment of anyone having to explain the situation to me. Rude stuff was never acknowledged in our house, well, not in front of me anyway. I was always too young. Actually, it still is, and I'm 47 now, but back then, I just thought it was stuff I wasn't old enough to understand. When I was 13, it was decided that I ought to be made aware of some things. My dad took me aside and attempted to explain the difference between boys and girls under the banner of, "Don't you let me catch you doing this." Blissfully unaware that I had heard a far more coherent and factual version of his 2-minute breakdown of what not to do in the school playground the year before. I now knew that the sex wasn't something that I was ever likely to do. Now, I was 19 when I finally figured it all out, when I made the connection between the forbidden knowledge and the taboo urges. Turns out that my Sunday school teachers had been wrong. You don't have to get married to make babies. In fact, sex doesn't have to involve babies at all. Probably best if it doesn't. Some people just do it for fun. Why did no one ever mention that bit before? I wonder if Leela knew that. Come to think of it, I wonder if my former headmaster knew that. The playground was where most kids got their sex education back then. Not in a practical way, though not like today. It was more like a game of pin the tail on the donkey back then, as we pieced together the various rumours and wild exaggerations that kids with older siblings had passed down and tried to make it fit for what little our teachers were prepared to impart on the subject. This was where I learned that you don't have to be able to grow a full beard to get jiggy with a lady, and that those big brown pants that she had worn hadn't been pants after all. But the headmaster's red-faced and hazy revelation had been spot on with one salient fact. Boys do get certain urges. And I've since discovered some girls get them as well. I don't know why. Perhaps it had something to do with the way he said it, or maybe it was because we normally only saw the headmaster when we were in trouble, but I always took his statement about the urges as an admonishment, as if this was something that, through hard work and strength of character, could and should be avoided. Every teenage urge I experienced always came with a could-do-better tinge of guilt. And I lost this briefly in my early 20s when I finally shed the shackles of my inhibitions and got down and dirty with a member of the opposite sex. Now it made sense. Now I knew what I'd actually wanted to do with Leela. If only she'd waited just a few more years, we could have worked it all out together. But if I'd thought for a moment that finally doing it would assuage the urges, then I had been seriously mistaken. At least now, though, I didn't need to feel bad about it. It's a good few years later now, I'm well into middle age, and I'm settled and happy with the lady that I intend to spend the rest of my days with. Those persistent urges are put to good use on a regular basis, and in ways that would have induced cardio arrest in my old headmaster. Why am I telling you all this? Well, like I say, I'm not a teenager anymore. I don't have the body or the stamina that I once had. The older I get, the less attractive I become, and at some point in the not too distant future, the old equipment's going to fail me. Trouble is, you see, I'm still urging and it's showing no sign of abatement. I'm still lusting after Doctor Who assistants. But the difference now is that although Amy Pond is the same age as Leela was back in 1978, I'm old enough to be her dad. So now I'm back to feeling guilty about those urges. Apparently it's wrong to have urges towards girls half my age, but they won't go away. Does anyone know when they're supposed to stop? Stephen? No. I feel as if I've been shortchanged, ladies and gentlemen, as if I wasn't told the whole story. When I grow up, it'll all become clear, he said. Well, I'm bloody well grown up now and I'm as confused as ever. So please, can you tell me, Doctor, is this normal?